All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for being with us here on ANF Plus. I'm Joy Lim Nakrin here with Tim Darnell, and this is the day that, of course, so many have been counting down to. Most importantly, I would say probably the candidates, not only for president, but in various other races. It is Election Day. It is finally here. And we know that voters across Georgia, many of them have been lined up at polling locations before the doors even open, Tim.
Yeah, Joy, and this is just one of the most exciting days of any electoral cycle. If you're engaged in the American electoral process, if you're engaged in the political process, this is just one of the hallmarks of the American experiment in becoming a democratic republic. That's ongoing, almost 250 years after our nation was founded. The chance for every registered voter throughout the country to have a direct, active voice in choosing really the most powerful elected official in the world. As you said, polls open at 7 a.m. We're already seeing long lines some places, not so long lines elsewhere. We heard from the Georgia Secretary of State's office about an hour ago that the average wait time for Georgia voters is about 49 seconds statewide. Some places are going to be a little bit longer. And right now, I imagine we are sort of in kind of a mid-morning lull. You see a peak of in-person voting from 7 to 9, and people try to get that vote in at their polling place before they go to work. Then we'll see perhaps a little peak around lunchtime, and then from 4 until 7 p.m. we anticipate that's when a lot of people heading out of work early want to get to the polls before they get home and before this horrible Metro Atlanta traffic really upsets their entire evening plans. But that's kind of what we're looking for at the rest of the day.
Yeah, and in some respects, it's actually a great thing that so many Georgians have taken advantage of early voting. More than 4 million Georgians have already cast their ballots, whether it's using early voting, using the absentee process and other means, and that is more than half of eligible registered voters here in Georgia. So hopefully it doesn't become too overwhelming at the polls today. But it is important to note, of course, there's so much focus on the presidential race. And of course that is warranted. But it is really important to note that there's several other important races that voters are going to be deciding today, including Fulton County District Attorney, the Gwinnett County Sheriff, the Cobb County Sheriff, Atlanta City Council Post 3, as well as DeKalb County Commissioners, and as well as several, U.S. House, State House, and Senate races that are on the ballots as well. And then there are several other issues that voters are going to be deciding on, including property tax issues, such as the homestead exemption, which would essentially potentially reduce or change the amount that folks are paying on their property taxes. So there's really something really for everyone. People focus on various different issues depending on your own life, but it is going to be a very important day at the polls nonetheless. And Tim, you've been talking a lot. You're such a great political historian. We've been talking so much about the fact that Georgia is a battleground state, and for the presidential election, it has become even more important than it has been in the past, right?
It really has, and this really all started in 2020 when Joe Biden became the first Democrat since Bill Clinton in 1992 to carry Georgia or any other deep southern state for that matter, from 1972 on until.
Oh, Tim, I hate to interrupt you, but there is a presser underway now with Fulton County. Let's go ahead and listen in.
We're pleased to report that all of our 177 polling locations opened on time this morning. They're fully staffed and ready to assist voters throughout the day. As of 9:40 a.m., over 29,500 ballots were already cast. And earlier today, unfortunately, we did have 5 non-credible bomb threats that were reported, leading to a temporary evacuation of 2 locations for approximately 30 minutes each. Thankfully, these locations are now operational again, and all polling sites are secure with active security presence. We are also working to obtain a court order to extend the hours of the 2 affected locations, ensure that every voter has the opportunity to participate. Outside of these brief interruptions, Election Day has been quiet with minimal issues reported, and we remain prepared to address any misinformation or additional disruptions to ensure a smooth experience for all voters today.
Were both of those locations in South Fulton?
Yes, they're actually in Union City.
Both of elementary schools?
It's Idris Darnell Community Center and C.H. Gallant School. And again, we will obtain a court order. We've been waiting for the police reports to get the exact time it was closed, and we'll extend those hours to match that time. Approximately 30 minutes. So they'll stay open till like 7:30 or so. Just those 2 locations. Everybody else closes at 7 o'clock. They did do a sweep, and it was a non-credible bomb threat.
What impact this had on the other 100+ locations? Were there any other surrounding sweeps done at any of the other places just as a precaution?
Other locations got non-credible bomb threats. We have advised poll managers to make sure that they confirm with their officer on site, who will make sure that the information is credible. So again, we have not done an additional sweep, if that's what you're asking me, for the other locations, but we want to make sure they're getting information from the accurate source.
How were these non-credible bomb threats coming in?
I would have, the police department have to give you that information. I do not know the jargon for all those, that part of the job, sorry, I do not. I do not know all the details, but we can have the.
The officers on site at each polling place investigate that, or how does that work here?
Again, I do not know the details, and when we brief later this evening, we can provide that information if necessary. Yes, we are still investigating.
Sorry, can you tell us whether you have any predictions for how long you think it will?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Whether you have any predictions for how long it will take you guys to finish the vote tabulation here in Fulton County?
Okay, so for advanced voting, of course, there was over 417,000 votes for that. You'll see those uploaded by 8 p.m. tonight. You'll also see the absentee by mail that have been received up until Monday. Those will also be uploaded by 8. As far as the rest of the locations, we are hoping that if there's no long lines in the evening, all those memory cards will come back, and we're hoping for before midnight. Let's put it that way. We should see the rest of the results come up.
Will you start uploading returns when it will close at 7, or do you think you will?
Right. So the memory cards have to be transported to this location, and as they arrive, we will start uploading. So you'll see the numbers change throughout the evening as those memory cards arrive.
We received a call that at one of the locations, Northwest Library at Scotts Crossing, that there was only one name under the Fulton County DA's race, that there wasn't a second name. Have you had any kind of complaints?
No, we have not. Our ballot project contains both candidates for that contest. Sometimes voters get confused. Once you select the candidate, when it prints out, it's not going to show the person that you did not select. But we have completely confirmed our ballot project, and all candidates are listed.
Can you talk about what's going on behind the scenes here at the call center? How many workers you have? Are they taking any calls, or are they just kind of checking out just information like that, trying to confirm what's going on?
Okay, so we have a fully staffed call center. There's approximately 50 people in our call center. All of the locations, the 177 locations, call into to that location in our WebEOC platform to address any issues that they have. But our call center is fully staffed, to answer your question.
And with the early vote so high, and you said 29,500 so far, is that comparable to like 2020 or 16, or how does that compare to? Is that a lot? Is that little?
I think it's a lot. I think we'll probably see over 100 today, 100,000.
And that would be, I guess, comparable or not, or just less than before because of
Well, the advanced voting for this election surpassed the 2020 advanced voting turnout. Again, in 2020, a lot of people voted absentee by mail due to COVID. So those people will most likely go and have either gone to advanced voting or will go today on election day. So we're assuming today might be over 100,000.
But how many did you have in 2020 one day up?
I don't have them in front of me, but I can give you that information later on this evening if you want to compare.
Do we have any other questions? If not, we're going to wrap things up.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Just keep in mind that we will have a second briefing this evening following our special call Board of Registration and Elections meeting, which starts at 6:30 in this room. Once that meeting concludes, we will immediately turn around for our second briefing. Thank you.
All right, so we just heard that briefing there from officials in Fulton County. Obviously, all important election day. I do want to let everyone know that we are also keeping our eyes on the potential for. Well, it's going to happen. It's just a question of when. But we're keeping an eye on this situation. You can see Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger set to address Georgia and really the nation, because there are a lot of eyeballs on this, at any moment now. So we're going to take you there live as soon as that begins. And really interesting, Tim, I recall that when Secretary Raffensperger was addressing the public last week, he made mention of he kind of went into this anecdote about his grandson and essentially winning and losing. And it was talking about his grandson losing a baseball game and doing it with such grace. And he essentially talked about, whatever the outcome of today, he hopes that whoever wins accepts gracefully, but whoever loses accepts gracefully. And they will be certifying results and standing by results. And I would assume that has some reference to what transpired in 2020.
I can't help but agree with you on that, Joy. We have seen the past couple of electoral cycles, not necessarily, really beginning in the around the 2018 mark, where we had a very contested gubernatorial election with Governor Brian Kemp or Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams. There was some reluctance on the part of the losing side to actually acknowledge the winner. And then we had the situation in 2020 where Georgia was really the site of what had been kind of an unprecedented effort to contest a presidential election, rightly or wrongly, full of whether or not you believe those allegations or not. It's really immaterial. The fact that there were claims of widespread election malfeasance in Fulton County. We just heard a briefing from the Fulton County Elections Office talking about the number of early votes and when they would be tabulated, as well as absentee ballot issues. But going back, the fact that Georgia is a battleground state, and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and Governor Brian Kemp, Chief Operating Officer of the Secretary of State's office, Gabriel Sterling, really became lightning rods for controversy in the aftermath of the 2020 election, with the allegations from former President Trump that they had not overseen a fair and impartial and accurately counted Georgia election. As we were talking before we went to the news conference, in 2020, Democrat Joe Biden became the first Democrat to win Georgia or any deep southern state in a presidential election since Bill Clinton successfully captured the White House in 1992. And now we see a situation where Georgia and perhaps North Carolina are two states in the Deep South, south of the Mason-Dixon line, so-called Mason-Dixon line, if we still use that vernacular here in the 21st century, that will play a role in deciding who will sit in the Oval Office at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But Secretary of State Raffensperger, it was interesting. I was talking with our outstanding political analyst from Kennesaw State University yesterday here on the First Alert Desk at Atlanta News First, Dr. Ben Taylor, and we were talking about Georgia's really very comprehensive advanced early voting system, and he was of the opinion that if there are other states out there who want to implement a very thorough, very easy to understand early voting process, that Georgia could perhaps be a model. And we've seen more than 4 million, almost half, of the registered voters here in Georgia have taken advantage of this early voting system. We have seen a little bit of controversy insofar as absentee ballots. The Georgia Supreme Court late yesterday afternoon ruled that the Cobb County Board of Elections must or is not allowed to accept any absentee ballots that come in after 7 p.m. on Tuesday, and that kind of that was somewhat controversial because there were some administrative and clerical errors that resulted in more than 3,000 absentee ballots really not being mailed out or issued in a timely fashion to those Cobb County voters. And now those voters who wanted to vote absentee by mail now must turn their absentee ballots in to a local polling place in Cobb County by 7 p.m. this evening. All in all, we haven't really seen a whole lot of other controversial issues insofar as early voting or absentee ballot voting is concerned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But there were some, obviously, and this happens. It's not just in the climate that we're in. Sometimes there are concerns about, election security, and I would say probably more so in the climate that we're in, given, given some of the violence that we've seen in recent years and the threats that we've seen in recent years. Our Sarah Hammond took a look at that aspect and what's being done at polling locations to really make sure that voters can feel safe out there. Let's go to her report.
Says after record-breaking turnout for early voting, about 4 million to be exact, they're expecting just over 1 million more people to turn out on Election Day. And Raffensperger's message to voters is this: have faith in the results, no matter the outcome.
I know that probably the eyes of the nation are probably on Georgia.
One more day until people can cast their ballots on Election Day, including here in the battleground state of Georgia. Monday, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger reiterated his position that it is easy to vote and hard to cheat in the Peach State.
What we do know is that Governor Kemp, myself, our General Assembly, and tens of thousands of election workers have worked every day to defend every legal vote.
Both Raffensperger and his Republican Chief Operating Officer, Gabriel Sterling, were on the front lines pushing back against claims of voter fraud in the 2020 election when Georgia, where President Biden won, was at the center of a scheme to overthrow the election results. Just over 11,000 votes separated Biden and former President Donald Trump here in Georgia. In 2024, Georgia election officials have touted extensive audits of voter rolls, voting machines and scanners not connected to the internet so they can't be hacked, multiple tests, and poll watchers observing the process as it's happening. They've also been combating misinformation from bad actors.
We as Americans, we just need to sit back sometime and make sure that you're really hearing the truth, because there's a lot of bad people out there that want to just kind of get us fighting amongst ourselves.
But Raffensperger's message Monday is clear. They are ready.
We just hopefully encourage everyone, if you want your voice heard and you haven't voted yet and you are registered, come out to vote.
A few things to remember ahead of Election Day. One, you need a valid ID to vote, and lines at these precincts can't be over an hour. And you must go to your polling precinct tomorrow to cast your ballot. And as long as you are in line by the time polls close, you will be allowed to vote. At the state capitol, Sarah Hammond for Atlanta News First.
So Sarah put together that report yesterday in anticipation of what we would see today, going over obviously the various issues at polling locations and really the precautions that are being taken. So she's back out at Fulton County. She's been surveying Fulton County polling locations today as well. And here she is with an update on the latest.
Between the record-breaking numbers we've seen for early voting and then now on Election Day, probably just over about 5 million Georgia voters are going to participate in this election. Even now, before early voting, it's been over 50% of active voters who have participated. And so far in Fulton County, as of the last day of early voting, the Secretary of State's website is not updating tallies as they go through the day. But at last count, at the last day of early voting, Fulton County had 417,000 voters who voted early in person. They had 40,000 absentee ballots. That's out of a total of 757,000 total active voters here in Fulton County. Fulton County has 177 polling locations open here today. And again, we have not really seen much of a line at all here at our polling location. But you might remember, so Fulton County officials say they know the microscope is on them for this election. You'll remember back in 2020, there were claims of widespread fraud in Fulton County. It was circulating largely among high-ranking Republicans. None of those claims of fraud have been proven despite dozens of investigations, audits. But, you know, Georgia oversight officials did find minor mistakes in the 2020 election system. And again, they say they are prepared, they are ready for what this election is going to bring. They opened a new $30 million election headquarters building where they're going to be counting all of those results on election night. They said they should start posting some of the results as early as 8 o'clock tonight. But again, a couple things you need to know if you are heading out to the polls. You need a valid ID if you want to come out and vote today. You also need to go to your polling precinct for early voting. You could go to any location in your county to vote early, but now on election day, you have to go to your polling precinct. We saw some people turned away earlier who were at the wrong polling location. They had to go somewhere else and figure out where that was. You can find that information online if you are not sure where that is or where you're supposed to go today. And again, if you are in line, so the polls again open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. As long as you are in line by 7 o'clock tonight, when those polls close, you will be allowed to vote. Now, we know this morning we're probably going to see some of the longest lines around lunchtime. The lines are probably going to pick back up again as people take their lunch breaks. And again, as people get off work later tonight, we might see some lines start picking back up. But again, I mean, if you're coming here to again, we're at the Atlanta Fulton Public Library. We have seen no lines here. People have been moving very quickly. Again, Secretary of State Raffensperger remarked on that, said he was hearing of lines in other places. So, of course, we're going to be keeping everybody up to date with everything that is going on as those results start coming in just after 7 o'clock tonight. That's another thing Secretary of State Raffensperger said. He said because so many people voted early in this election, it's going to allow for those results to come in a lot faster than they would have if everybody was voting here on Election Day. So, of course, we will keep everybody up to date with what is going on, the latest on Election Day here in Battleground, Georgia. All eyes are on this state to see how this is going to shake out. But for now, in Fulton County, I'm Sarah Hammond for Atlanta News First.
And Joy, you and I were talking about election security before we heard that excellent report from Sarah Hammond. I will mention that earlier this morning, Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr, along with 49 other attorneys general from across the United States, issued a joint statement really condemning any sort of political violence or violent protests that could result as these election results come in. That comment is posted on our live blog. We are covering all of the latest live election updates in a live format on Atlanta News First and atlantanewsfirst.com. That will encourage everyone to check out for the latest election updates and informations. But as Sarah said, Georgia is a battleground state, one of only a handful that will or possibly will decide the 2024 election and who will become the 47th President of the United States. We had some information that was prepared by our corporate office, Gray Media Television Bureau in Washington, D.C., looking at the different paths to victory for both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Kamala Harris, her easiest path to victory, something to watch for tonight after 7 p.m. throughout the evening hours, is exactly 270 electoral votes. That's enough to win the White House. That could come if she holds the quote-unquote blue wall. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, she'll have the 270 votes she'll need to become the first woman and the first woman of color to ever to sit in the Oval Office, as well as, if not the first, one of the first Democratic primary contenders to have never won a primary election. She did not face any primaries this year in her abbreviated path to securing the Democratic nomination for president, and she was unsuccessful in winning any primary elections in 2020 when she eventually became a race that was eventually won by Joe Biden, and she would become Joe Biden's vice president. For Donald Trump, his easiest path is actually with two deep southern states. He wins 270 electoral votes with victories in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. North Carolina and Georgia, just very surprising that two states south of the Mason-Dixon line are determinate in determining or in choosing who the next president of the United States is. There is another path to victory for Donald Trump, and again, it will run through Georgia. If he wins Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, and Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania, and he has been leading in polling both here in Georgia and Arizona. If he can pick up Nevada and North Carolina, he would only need one of the Rust Belt states, that being Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin, to win the White House and become, one of the most historic presidencies in American history. The only ex-president to have been impeached twice, to have become a convicted felon, to have lost his first re-election bid, and really turning around and recapturing the White House. It will be unprecedented in American history. And finally, there is another path for Kamala Harris that runs through Georgia and North Carolina. If she were to win Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada, and Arizona, she can win the presidency by just winning the Sun Belt, basically here in Georgia and North Carolina, or a combination of other Sun Belt or Rust Belt states. So those are 4 or 5 paths to victory, the quickest and easiest paths to victory for two contenders in a presidential election that is unlike any in American history.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've been talking a lot about just kind of the contesting of results, right? And what happened in 2020. And, our investigative team, our colleague Anastasia Almos, took a closer look at the issue of poll watchers, who essentially make sure that everything is going as it should be at the polls. I want to get to her report on exactly what poll watchers do and just the various processes in place to make sure that voting is going as it should be.
All eyes on election ballots in 60 seconds. What are poll watchers and monitors? They're not the security companies that may be sitting outside of the polling place. They look like ordinary people, keeping an eye on any potential problems for voters. Poll watchers are inside. They'll be wearing a badge that identifies who they are. They're trained by organizations like political parties or state agencies to observe and monitor the election process. A poll monitor watches from outside the polling place to report problems such as long lines. They do not have to wear an identifying badge, but there are a few rules. Poll watchers and monitors can't be candidates. They can't interfere with the voting process, and they can't carry weapons. Georgia law allows poll workers to call the police and have watchers and monitors removed if they try to interfere with the election in any way. Anastasia Olmos, Atlanta News First, investigates.
All right, so also a lot of questions about where to vote. And be warned, that can change over the years. So if you think you know, well, maybe you want to check again. Here's Brendan Keefe with Where to Vote.
Countdown to voting time, your questions asked and answered in 60 seconds. Where do I cast my ballot? Sounds like a simple question, but the answer may not be that easy. You may have voted in this same spot for the last several elections, but don't be surprised if the location has moved to the other side of your neighborhood, even if you've stayed put. Polling places can change from one primary to the next, or even from the primary to the general election. So how do I find out where to vote? It turns out the answer is easy, and it's already on your phone. Just Google the My Voter page, or you can point your web browser to mvp.sos.ga.gov. Then enter your first name, your last name, your date of birth, and then scroll to the polling information section. You can then get the precise location for this election. Counting down to the election, I'm Brendan Keefe. Atlanta News First investigates.
Joy, that was my colleague on the investigative unit, Brendan Keefe, one of the most decorated investigative reporters in the nation, and that's no exaggeration. He truly is. But we were talking a little while ago. Not only will the 47th president of the United States be decided within the next several hours, all 14 of Georgia's congressional seats are on the ballot. Not many surprises are anticipated there, but the U.S. Constitution requires every national congressional representative stand for re-election every 2 years. Also, this year in Georgia, we are constitutionally mandated to elect or re-elect every statewide representative and state senator. Not many surprises there as well. But also there are 3 statewide referendums on the ballot having to do with homestead property tax exemption and also the creation of a new tax tribunal court. And again, Brendan Keefe from Atlanta News First Investigates has this piece in 60 seconds.
Between the record-breaking numbers we've seen for early voting and then now on Election Day,
Now on Atlanta News First, this is Campaign 2024 special coverage.
All right, so we've been talking about just obviously how the polling goes at the polling locations and how voting is supposed to go, and there are various rules in place. You mentioned before, Tim, the work that your investigative team has done to really shed some light on that, and I know Brendan Keefe has put together one investigative piece on polling rules. Let's listen.
Let's start the clock. First off, can you take a picture of your ballot? Sorry, all you TikTokers and Instagrammers, your phone will have to stay inside your pocket, inside the polling place. No selfies or live streams, even for influencers. Georgia's ballots are secret on purpose because a century ago, people were caught paying others to vote a certain way. A photo would provide proof they've held up their end of the bargain. So you can't take a picture of yourself, anyone else, or your ballot. If I'm in line when the polls close, do I still get to vote? Yes. They will keep the polls open until the last person in line at 7 p.m. gets to the front to cast their ballot. Can I wear a political t-shirt or a campaign pin inside the polling place? Anything for or against a certain candidate on the ballot is banned within 150 feet of a polling place and 25 feet from a voter in line. We're counting down to the election. I'm Brendan Keefe. Atlanta News First Investigates.
That was award-winning investigative reporter Brendan Keefe from one of my colleagues here at Atlanta News First and Atlanta News First Investigates, talking a little bit about the history of Georgia's revised voting rules. A lot of these changes that Brendan talked about came after the 2020 election, in which Donald Trump was contesting the results of that presidential election.
All right, and we have Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger at the podium now, and he is giving an update on today's voting.
I've led the way to make Georgia the most secure, free, and fair place to vote in the United States. And we've done that by doing a citizen audit, make sure only American citizens are on the voter rolls. We've done 2 audits on that. Now we have photo ID for all forms of voting. We have photo ID for absentee voting. I believe that has helped shore up security and also confidence. And then we have a multi-state organization that makes sure we have clean voter lists, so our lists are up to date and accurate. So far, we're tracking line times. Average line time in Georgia right now is 2 minutes. And then with the electronic poll pads, average check-in is 49 seconds. When I checked in, it was actually under 49 seconds. It was actually about 47 on early voting. And I did want to share that because you probably thought I got special treatment. But today, it's 49 seconds for everyone in Georgia. And so people are having a great voting experience. So turnout looks like right now it's just solid, steady, and it's more than you would think because the lines are moving so quickly. So people are in and out in less than 10 minutes. So it's just a tremendous day. So that's where we are right now. And didn't know if anyone had any questions right now they'd like to ask. Yes, sir.
Secretary of State, when do you think Georgia will be able to call a winner in the presidential race?
Well, we will have, with SB 189, all of this early voting, so that's over 4 million ballots that were cast early and the absentees that were accepted. All of that will have to be uploaded and reported no later than 1 hour after the polls close. Most polls will be closing at 7 p.m., so by 8 p.m. you'll have probably 99% of all that. So that'll be uploaded. So you get a good idea of what the race looks like. Then all the voting that you're seeing today, before the end of the night, you'll have all of that. Many of the smaller counties are pushing to be done by 10:30 at the latest. But that's the type of response you're going to see in the smaller counties. But by the end of the night, you'll have all of those results.
One follow-up question. Regardless of the outcome, do you expect legal challenges?
Well, that gets into future predictions, and our job is to make sure we have a secure election that's accurate, and we're really excited that's also going to be fast. The voters are having a great experience. Lady in the back?
Sorry to interrupt. We've received a lot of emails today about people who say their polling location was changed last minute. Signs outside of polling locations say it's actually this other location. Are there any reports of that? Do you know of any last minute changes? What should people do if they encounter this?
I haven't heard any reports about last minute poll changes.
Did all the polls open on time at 7? Any delays to it?
As far as we know right now, it's been smooth, and so we obviously hear about that a little bit later. But you always have a couple precincts that will have a 15-minute or a 30-minute extension. When you have 2,400, there's always something that can happen right at 7 a.m. I know I was up at 5, but many of the people that are working here, when I checked with them, they were actually up at 4. So I guess they slept in.
Still on pace for 1 million, you think, today?
Oh, I think we'll pass that based on where we are right now, just what the feedback we're getting. I think it'll be a little bit north of that. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
You can't predict the future, but have you prepared for litigation if you need to go to court, and specifically what kind of things have you done?
We're battle tested, and we'll have a process in place. We'll make sure we follow the law, follow the Constitution, and report the results accurately.
One last question. Anyone else? Several thousand Cobb County voters got their ballots late. They were under the impression, many of them, as of yesterday, that they would be able to return those ballots late. With the motion to stay now, any word to them or to the people who are in charge of submitting those ballots or mailing those ballots?
The Georgia Supreme Court had a ruling, and every voter needs to return those no later than 7 p.m. If they can't get to the election office for Cobb County, then they can show up at their precinct, and they can then, nullify their absentee ballot, and then they can vote in person. So there's a process in place.
Have you heard of any threats at polling places that we heard about one bomb threat? Have you heard any other verifiable threats at any polling places?
We've heard some threats that were of Russian origin, and so I don't know how to describe if that's viable. We don't think they are, but in the interest of public safety, you always check that out, and we'll just continue to be very responsive when we hear about stuff like that. We identified the source, and it was from Russia.
Can you elaborate on that? What kind of threats? Of Russia?
As he said, it's a bomb threat.
So of Russia, and you're confident of the Russians you did?
Yeah, just like we had the DDoS attack on Monday, October 14th, 420,000, pings, denial service from Russians. So we added that interface that said, I am a human, I'm not a robot. So they're up to no mischief, it seems, and they don't want us to have a smooth, fair, and accurate election. And anything they can get us to fight among ourselves, they can count that as a victory. So that tells you a little bit about the Russians. They're not our friends. Anyone that thinks they are hasn't been reading the newspapers. Thank you so much.
Can you clarify where they were from?
my goodness, I'm sorry, really badly timed sneeze. But we just heard that live report from that live update from Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. I apologize, Tim, the allergies. But he essentially said, quote, "We're battle tested. We are following the law. We're following the Constitution." He refused to answer the question about whether there are going to be legal challenges. We typically do see legal challenges. I personally would not be surprised if we did see that following the tallying of the votes tonight.
And to be fair to the Secretary of State, Joy, there's really no way for him to predict whether or not there will be any legal challenges or not. We expect that there may be, considering just how close the vote could be. And let's say, it could be from either the Democratic side or the Republican side. We've seen challenges from both ends of the political spectrum before. But one thing the Secretary of State said that I want to kind of circle back to what we were talking about, and that is Georgia's current voting laws. He specifically mentioned Senate Bill 189 that established these new voter ID procedures, the exact procedure for advanced voting and for absentee ballot voting. These were implemented in the aftermath of the chaotic 2020 presidential election, which saw Donald Trump really attempt to allegedly engage in a campaign to, again, allegedly, it's one of those words that we always want to use in the journalistic enterprise to until facts are actually proven, to influence the outcome of Georgia's 2020 presidential election, an election that saw him lose to Joe Biden, and Joe Biden becoming the first Democrat since 1992 to carry Georgia or any southern state in a presidential election. So really, Georgia has, according to our good friend Dr. Ben Taylor at Kennesaw State University, who will be in our studios later this evening and throughout the evening to bring you the latest live election results and analysis on WANF, Atlanta News First, and AtlantaNewsFirst.com. Secretary Raffensperger and the state Republican Party have really fashioned a very modern, very easy to use, very convenient mechanism by which Georgians can use to cast their votes. And this came even after the system and these new voter rules came under fire early in the Biden administration. If you recall, President Biden referred to Georgia's voting laws as quote-unquote Jim Crow 2.0. There were a lot of allegations from Democratic and progressive groups that Georgia was attempting to suppress the minority vote and the vote of those in historically underserved communities. And yet, beginning in 2022, with the gubernatorial election and the U.S. Senate election, continuing here in 2024, Georgians have shattered every previous early voting record in the books. And that kind of, in our minds, kind of disproves the notion that Georgia is attempting to subvert the electoral process in favor of one interest group or political spectrum at the expense of another. And really, to our minds, we have one of the most sophisticated and yet easy to use, not infallible. No system is going to be 100% infallible, but really a model for other states that are looking to implement these very easy, very convenient early voting mechanisms.
Yeah, and it's incredible that we've had about half of the registered
That's
voters
never happened before
here in Georgia.
Ever.
I mean, already, before the polls even opened this morning. And we heard from the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, as he gave that live update just moments ago, how that is going to help this process become so much more efficient today. In fact, he said by 8 p.m. they'll have 99% of these votes uploaded, reported, and they're really going to have a good handle on where things stand, what the results are, and that's very early, as we know.
It's very interesting, and if indeed Georgia is called by 9 p.m. or even 10 p.m. You have to keep in mind a lot of the western mountain states and western states polls will still be open at that time. Is that going to influence the results of Arizona, Nevada, some of these western-leaning battleground states where the road to the Oval Office actually will run through? We saw a similar situation, I want to say, back in 1980 or 1984, when this was back in the days when we had three major networks, CBS, NBC, and ABC. Really the last two landslide elections that we've seen in American politics. 1980, Ronald Reagan carrying 48 states on his way to a resounding victory over then President Jimmy Carter. 1984, President Reagan carrying 49 states in his reelection bid against Democrat Walter Mondale. And I remember there was a lot of criticism of the national networks for calling the race so early and how that could have affected the results of states whose polls were still open. Kind of interesting, something I'm kind of curious to see if in fact Georgia is just supremely efficient and we're able to learn who has carried this all-important battleground state of 16 electoral votes, how that will impact the results and turnout of other states in the United States that are battleground states this year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, I mean, of course, the presidential election is so important, but of course there's several local issues that voters are deciding today. We can't forget that there's a Fulton County District Attorney race, the Gwinnett County Sheriff, the Cobb County Sheriff, Atlanta City Council Post 3, as well as DeKalb County Commissioners, several U.S. House, State House, Senate races also on the ballot as well. I mean, certainly you make an excellent point that if our results are essentially determined while other states are still voting, potentially maybe that could have some kind of impact on the presidential election. But with regards to these other issues, these statewide and local issues, you know, how much of an impact does that have to have these determinations made early? Does it basically just give voters more peace of mind?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, let's be clear that really the only race that we are thinking will be very close is the presidential race. Now, Georgia has 14 congressional districts. We have a breakdown of 9 Republicans and 5 Democrats. We have one open seat in Metro Atlanta, the 3rd district, where Republican Brian Jack is seeking to become Georgia's newest congressman, running against a Democrat who I believe her name is Maura Keller, if I'm not mistaken. This is a heavily Republican district held by the retiring Drew Ferguson. Really, none of the polling in Georgia's congressional races, despite the candidates' claims to the contrary, are really in doubt. We fully expect that all of Georgia's congressional districts, the breakdown will remain 9 Republicans and 5 Democrats, and neither of Georgia's 2 U.S. senators are up for re-election or up for election or re-election this year. There are no statewide constitutional races. Governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general will all come up in 2026. We anticipate a lot of those are going to be open seats as well, but for the statewide constitutional referendums, we're looking at two measures on every Georgian's ballot this year have to do with the property tax exemption provision, and the third creating a Georgia tax tribunal court, another court to be established through the state's judicial system. So we'll see not a lot of surprises, not really too sure how these statewide referendums are going to go, but really the main issue that everyone is looking at is who Georgia will vote for to become the 47th president of the United States.
Yeah, and we've seen that the candidates and their surrogates have been spending so much time in Georgia, even this past weekend, as obviously it is a very all-important battleground state. But you made the point that that wasn't historically always so, that we really saw that it was a decision maker in 2020, and that since that time, there's been really almost a hyper focus on the Peach State.
There has been, and we have to go back really to the late 1960s and early 1970s. The 1968 presidential election between Richard Nixon and Vice President Hubert Humphrey was complicated by the fact that there was a third-party candidate running as an independent. Alabama Governor George Wallace, who was an avowed segregationist, really siphoned off a lot of votes in that election and propelled Richard Nixon to become the then new President of the United States. Richard Nixon and the Republican Party really knew that the Deep South had been lost to Democrats as a result of President Lyndon Johnson's support of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1968 Voting Rights Act. From 1972 on until 1992, every Republican presidential candidate in those 4-year spans carried every deep southern state until Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton in 1992 carried Georgia on his way to becoming President of the United States. That has, after 1992, even in his re-election bid, Clinton did not carry any Deep South state. It wasn't until Democrat Joe Biden in 2020 carried Georgia. That was the only Deep South state that any Democrat had carried since 1992. And now we see Georgia and North Carolina in play. We've seen Vice President Kamala Harris spend a lot of time in North Carolina. Former President Donald Trump spending a lot of time in North Carolina and Georgia. So it's really, I'm interested to see how this all shakes out. And 4 years from now, when we will have another presidential election, whether or not Georgia and North Carolina or any other deep southern states are in play, and whether or not we are red, blue, purple, or pick your color.
Yeah.
We'll find out over the next few hours.
Absolutely. And in this home stretch leading up to today, we mentioned all the time that has been spent campaigning here in the Peach State. I want to go back to a report put together by political reporter Doug Reardon. This was from previously in our coverage, really just looking at what these candidates have done in the home stretch.
In this video posted to Twitter this week, a man claims to be a Haitian immigrant who voted for Kamala Harris in both Gwinnett and in Fulton counties. Then he flashes 4 identical fake IDs to the camera. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and his COO, Gabriel Sterling, tweeted out the video was, quote, a ridiculously obvious lie and, quote, likely a production of Russian troll farms. They were right, said the FBI in a statement, calling the men Russian-influenced actors and saying the video was, quote, part of Moscow's broader effort to raise unfounded questions about the integrity of the U.S. election. Sterling had already warned Georgians about this kind of activity this week, urging people to be cautious and to trust officials.
And it is a choice. People are making a choice not to believe those of us who are in the government offices, and I get it sometimes. You should be skeptical. You can ask questions, and those can be legitimate. But some of these things are so cuckoo-ca-choo crazy town that it's ridiculous to even try to respond to sometimes.
A real voter issue took over Cobb County Superior Court on Friday. The ACLU sued the county for failing to mail out 3,000 absentee ballots. They demanded the county overnight the ballots to voters and extend the deadline for return to November 8th, the last day for voters to fix mistakes with their ballots. Doug Reardon, Atlanta News First.
All right, so Doug Reardon giving us that report, kind of giving you a little bit of context on what we've been dealing with leading up to today, various different issues. And, one thing that also, Tim, and you and I have been talking about a little bit is about the Electoral College, and really what we've seen over the years is how important really the distinction has become, how pronounced, I should say, the distinction has become between the popular vote and the electoral vote. And we saw it was the difference between Hillary Clinton winning and losing to who would become former President Donald Trump.
Right, and Joy, on AtlantaNewsFirst.com, we have a piece also put together by our Washington, D.C. Bureau of Gray Media about what the Electoral College is and what it actually does. From a historical standpoint, the Electoral College was enshrined really in the U.S. Constitution, kind of as a compromise between those founding fathers who wanted a direct popular vote to choose the next president of the United States and those who wanted a congressional or another intermediate body to decide who will occupy the Oval Office. And the Electoral College is a compromise between the two. Every state is allotted a certain number of electors based on the number of congressional and Senate representatives they have in Congress. Georgia has 14 congressional representatives and 2 U.S. senators. Therefore, we have 16 electoral votes. It wasn't really until the 1990s when we first saw a modern focus of controversy or attention focused on the Electoral College when, I should say 2002, when Al Gore actually won more popular votes than George W. Bush, and yet George Bush was chosen to be the victor of that 2002. Or I should say 2000, pardon me, I'm getting my dates kind of mixed up, in the 2000 presidential election that saw George Bush ascend to the White House. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won more popular votes than Donald Trump did, and yet Donald Trump won the Electoral College vote. In 2020, I should say, Donald Trump contested Georgia's Electoral College results and therefore, kind of led to a series of events that were unprecedented in American politics. So there's always discussion as to whether or not we should be electing a president through the Electoral College, something that we've been doing for 250 years now, or whether or not it should be chosen by popular vote. To do away with the Electoral College would require a constitutional amendment, and that is a very complicated, precarious process for any political undertaking to do. So those are some of the things that we're looking for. There could be an Electoral College tie tonight, in which case the election would be thrown over into the U.S. House of Representatives, currently held by a razor-thin majority of the Republican Party. However, the Congress could be in play tonight as other states choose, as we are constitutionally required to do. Every congressional representative is up for re-election every 2 years. So the House of Representatives could be in play tonight as we move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Tim Darnell, you're really a political historian, so appreciate your context with that. Our colleagues Gervier Dinza and Brooks Baptiste are going to pick up this coverage of our election here, our all-important election day for 2024 in just a few moments.
A local news team alerts you first before every storm, protects you with every investigation, and looks for all sides to every story. Atlanta's only locally owned news team is Atlanta News First.
We might be new, but we were built here. That means more breaking news that matters, more first alert weather helping you plan, and more honest reporting so you can make up your own mind.
The news you watch should be clear about their agenda.
At Atlanta News First, our agenda is you.
Your home for the best local election coverage is Atlanta News First, putting policy in the spotlight and explaining how your vote will impact the future, from campaign headquarters to the battlegrounds and to the balance of power in Congress. No one has more live coverage than Atlanta News First, before, during, and after Election Day on every screen. Our agenda is your rights, your vote. Get the most live breaking updates. On Atlanta News First, our agenda is you. First Alert Weather alerts you first, days before the storm, helps you plan with Atlanta's most accurate forecast, 10 years in a row, and updates you before it matters. When we know, you know. Atlanta's only locally owned news and weather team is Atlanta News First.
Our weather team was built here to handle Georgia weather. Our agenda is your safety,
signs of rotation here.
your plans,
We're going to see rounds of storms.
your peace of mind.
At Atlanta News First, our agenda is you.
Cities profiting off drivers. Atlanta News First exposes Georgia's worst speed traps.
I was told I needed to write so many tickets a night.
With former officers saying the quiet part out loud.
You wrote tickets because of the quota that I would ordinarily have not have written.
An investigation that has Georgia lawmakers looking to make changes, protecting every driver in the state. Atlanta News First investigates because our agenda is your rights, your tax dollars. Watch taxation through citation. Streaming now on Atlanta News First Plus.
Hello, everybody, and our coverage on this election day continues right now on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Brooks Baptiste, along with Gravir Denza.
Good morning.
You know what, Gravir, this is one of those days where there is just a lot that is happening, a lot that we have to catch people up about, and this is really the start of what we could say might be a marathon, because it may not be clear tonight who is the next president of the United States.
I know, it's crazy. Matter of fact, I was just talking with Joy Lim Nakrin, who just got off of here a second ago, and I said, when did Joe Biden drop out of the race?
I know.
I mean, gosh, there was the debate here, remember?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the Trump campaign is thinking, wow, this race is ours. And how quickly things turned, right? And it has been crazy since then.
I was going to say, it's been just really amazing watching both candidates who have they don't seem to be taking anything for granted, because they understand that a race like this, we've heard from analysts, we've heard from experts who say this really could go either way.
Right.
So, of course, we're going to be watching it, but nobody really knows how this is going to go.
You got that right. I mean, I think some of the latest polls have Mr. Trump up by 1 here, which virtually means nothing since you got that margin of error of 3 points. And pretty much the same in most states. That's why they're hitting it hard in those 7 battleground states, and that amazes me too.
Yeah.
I mean, Donald Trump is what, 78, right? And the fact that they have been going and going and going is pretty remarkable.
Nonstop, for sure. So here at home, we know many of you will likely be getting out to cast your ballot. Some of you already participated in early voting and whatnot. So we do want to talk about the polling hours and whatnot, because the polls open at 7 o'clock this morning. They will close at 7 o'clock this evening. And Gravir, I said this on the air earlier, but I think this is so important to reiterate time and time again. If you are in line by 7 o'clock, you reserve the right to vote. You know, some people think, well, I got in line at 6:59, but I didn't get inside of the polling place or the precinct, so I can't vote. That's not the case.
Correct. So the polls do close at 7 o'clock. But if you're in line, then you will be allowed to vote. And then once those votes start coming in, we'll get a better idea of where things stand, right?
For sure. And also, keep in mind, we're not just thinking about Kamala Harris and Donald Trump and who's going to win in the presidential race. There are so many other races that we're watching. And Gavira, we've got a list right here, and I guess we'll catch people up on these.
Okay.
We've got the Fulton County District Attorney. We understand that Fani Willis is up for re-election right now. She does have one opponent. Also, you've got the Gwinnett County Sheriff and also the Cobb County Sheriff and several others.
We've got DeKalb County commissioners. And keep in mind, too, that actually the balance of power in the U.S. House and the Senate is on the line today as well. We've got several here in Georgia. We've got several U.S. House, State House, and Senate races on the ballot, too. So when you go to the polls today, if you know, those of you that haven't voted already, because those early voting numbers have been off the charts.
I know, wow.
But keep in mind that those are very important races. Everything is local, right? It starts local and then goes big.
And it's also worth reminding you, too, that we do have ballot breakdowns and sample ballots, because one of the hardest things when you participate in voting is knowing what in the world is going to be on your ballot. So don't think that just because you go to the poll and then you receive your ballot and you're there on the screen and you're like, wait, what is this talking about? What is that talking about? So we have a resource for you on AtlantaNewsFirst.com and on the free Atlanta News First app, where you can see a sample ballot. As a matter of fact, we have it here for you on the screen. And it's so simple. You'll click right there where it says, listen, those are a little too small for me. I can't see that. But mvp.sos.ga.gov, and you just click on that. You'll put in your first initial, your last name, the county, your date of birth, and you click submit, and then it will bring up your sample ballot.
Right. And you voted already, right?
I did.
And you voted in Cobb County?
In Cobb County.
So was your ballot pretty clear?
Oh, absolutely. And what's funny, even though we report on these things, I still went to this website from AtlantaNewsFirst.com to ensure I knew what was on the ballot. You know, for folks who are out there voting in Cobb County, you have the MSPLOST, legislation that you're voting on as well. Like you said, there are some seats and whatnot, and in Congress that you're going to be voting for. So there really is a lot for you to know before you get out there so that you can make the best and the informed vote that you, I'm sure, would like to make.
So you were one of those early voters.
Oh, yeah, early vote. And,
4 million of them?
Yeah, and you know, we've been talking about just the records being shattered and whatnot, but even when I went out there last Monday in Cobb County to one of my places out there in Mableton, I was kind of shocked by how many people were there at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning.
Wow.
And I'm like, is everybody else off like I am today or not so much? But it just shows you people are taking this election seriously. And we've seen even the live pictures that we've had this morning out of Fulton and Cobb County that people are there and they're not messing around.
Right. Those lines were pretty long, right? Even some of those, Don Shipman was out there for us on Atlanta News First this morning on our morning show. And he was reporting that there were people in line even before the polls opened.
Yes.
So, yes, important election. It is a historic election, right?
Yeah.
We could be electing our first woman president.
Yeah.
Or Mr. Trump, who held it before as a convicted felon. I mean, there's a lot going on in this election.
Yeah, it will be historic either way.
Correct.
You mentioned Don, because Don did something kind of cool this morning. He was all over the place, all over the metro, and he is in Cobb County right now. We want to hear from him of how things are looking out there as you make your way to the polls.
And we are talking with one of the hardest working reporters in Metro Atlanta, our very own Don Shipman, who is outside a polling place in Smyrna in Cobb County. Don, tell us what the scene is like right now.
Right now, it's relatively quiet, but that was not the case earlier this morning. In fact, just before the polls opened, we got here just about 30 minutes before the polls opened, and there was a line that was wrapped around the building right here. So there was probably about 4 dozen people waiting in line before the polls even opened. But once the polls did open, and I can tell you this, that they opened about 3 minutes late here at this polling location. I didn't get a clear indication as to why they opened up late, but they did open up 3 minutes late here at this location. Once they did, the line moved relatively quickly. We talked with one voter who said it took just about maybe 15, 20 minutes.
Now, we heard a report earlier this morning from Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger saying that the average wait time for voters across the state was about 49 seconds. What was the wait time like this morning when you were at the polls early this morning?
Well, so at this location, specifically in the morning, and I want to preface this by saying that early, like you're going to have peak voting times. That's going to be early in the morning before people are heading off to work. So we saw that this morning where wait times were right around 15 minutes. I talked to another woman who told me that it was closer to 30 minutes for her. Again, that's in the morning. We expect those peak times to be around noontime when people are out for lunch. They will likely line up at a polling location just like this, and then you're going to see those lines again after work. So think post 4 o'clock, maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock definitely, and as we approach to when those polls begin to close, which is at 7 o'clock. Now, right now, there is no line here. Now, inside, I can tell you that it's a relatively small space where those voting machines are located. There's just about 8 voting machines inside the space here, so it is kind of small. So when the line does form, the wait time can go up to at least 30 minutes here right now.
Don, as you're aware, on Monday, the Georgia Supreme Court rejected or really rejected Cobb County's Board of Elections from accepting or counting any absentee ballots that come in or that could come in after 7 p.m. Tuesday, Election Day. Have you heard any protest or criticisms from any Cobb County voters regarding that decision?
I haven't heard directly from Cobb County voters on that decision specifically, and of course that's all hinging on the fact that the Postal Service is a bit slow right now. That's one of the reasons they wanted to have that extended, I understand. And keep in mind, more than 4 million early voters. That includes the absentee, and it also, I believe it includes the absentee and obviously those in-person voting that we were doing. So that's here in Georgia, more than 4 million. As far as your question, as far as the voters here, a lot of these voters here, they either, one woman told me it was just basically out of convenience that she voted today because she was traveling, she was out of the country and all that. Another person I talked with said that they voted today because they like the excitement of Election Day. It's a tradition for them to vote on Election Day. So that's what we're hearing specifically from voters here. One woman I did chat with did say, though, she said, made a point to say, give your poll workers a break. Smile, say hello, make conversation. They're just doing their job.
And Georgia's poll workers are really the heartbeat of the state's electoral system, and poll workers deserve all of our praise and support and gratitude. In terms of early voting, you've been covering this topic extensively, as you just mentioned. 4 million Georgians have already voted early. Tell me, from your standpoint and from talking to voters, what kind of impact has Georgia's extensive, very comprehensive, seemingly very comprehensive early voting system, what kind of impact has that made on voters' lives and their participation in the electoral process?
You know what? I think the main word that I've heard over and over and over is convenience. And another person I talked with here, and other voters, they were saying that, a lot of people have to work. So, to have just one day to vote and hope that you can get to your polling location, which is, you have a designated polling location when you're voting on Election Day. So that's for folks here in Smyrna, for example. They have this location that they have to vote at. So they need to make sure that they're able to get to this location before work, or get to this location during their lunch hour if they have one today, or making sure that they can get out of work and get here in time. And we all know Metro Atlanta traffic, right? So the people that I've talked with who voted in person early, they said that they did it out of convenience. They wanted to make sure that their voice was heard. So early in-person voting gave them more opportunity to vote. And also keep in mind, early in-person voting, you had more options in the sense of where you could vote. For example, I live in Fulton County in Grant Park, but I didn't vote in my normal Grant Park location because I voted early in person. I voted at a different Fulton County location only because it was convenient for me at the time. I happened to be driving by. I stopped in, was in and out within 10 minutes. And that's pretty much the way it was for a lot of early voting. There really were no wait times for the most part when you look at the overall scope of early voting in person.
We're wrapping up our conversation with Don Shipman, who is outside a Smyrna polling place. Don, tell us what's on tap for the rest of your day today.
Say that one more time.
Don, tell us what are you going to be covering for the rest of Election Day? What are some of the issues that you are looking for?
Yeah. Okay, so for our noon broadcast, I'm going to be speaking with more of those voters. We're going to have sound from them and why they decided to come out today, what it was like for them today. One thing I do want to bring up, and I brought it up, the fact that this polling location was open just about 3 minutes late. One thing I noticed, and I want our viewers to understand this, voters to understand this, what can they expect when they come here, or any location that they go to vote in, for example? You can expect you're going to see those poll workers. Those poll workers are here to help you kind of navigate the system, navigate that line, where you need to go once you get inside and everything like that. And then you're also going to notice poll watchers. At this location, I believe there were 3 of them that I counted at this location. And they're paying close attention. What are they paying close attention to? They're making sure that the candidates with their signs are far enough away from the entrance. That distance is 150 feet. In fact, we saw one person holding a sign that wasn't 150 feet away. The poll watcher was here. They actually had a tape measure that they brought from the entrance here all the way back and said, you got to move back just a little bit further. So no major issue. That person took their sign and moved back a little bit further, but that's why these poll watchers are here. The other thing, keep in mind, you got to make sure you have a photo ID. What does that look like? That looks like your driver's license, maybe your passport or your military ID. You got to make sure you have that with you. They will be checking that in the system before you cast your ballot. Back to you.
And we're back here live at the newsroom. That was Don Shipman and Tim Darnell conducting that interview for us, that talkback, I should say. You know, Gavir, that's very great information about what folks need to make sure they bring. And there are also a couple of things that they should not bring, because we've seen some videos that have now gone viral on social media of people who have decided to wear shirts and hats in support of a particular candidate. And by law, you cannot do that. The poll workers will turn you away, and they have every right to do so.
At 150 feet.
At 150 feet.
Away from the polling place. Actually, it's funny because this morning they were out there with the tape measure. Actually, no, literally, the poll workers were out there with a tape measure, making sure you were the correct distance away from that polling location if you were in any sort of, gear.
Yeah, and I mean, gear looks like it looks these days. It doesn't look like it used to look maybe back in 2000, 2008, and before that. So you understand that they're just doing their job. And I think it is important to also say the poll workers are doing their jobs. Give them some grace on a day like today. They are working a long day. Some of them will be there likely from 7 to 7, and they're patient with the machine, so hopefully you will be patient with them as well.
We certainly don't want any kind of repeats of what happened in 2020, specifically in Fulton County. There have been a few issues with voting, specifically the absentee ballots, like over in Cobb County. Big decision by the Georgia Supreme Court. Cobb County is not getting an extension to count those mail-in ballots that were delayed through the Postal Service. Georgia's Supreme Court made that decision yesterday afternoon. This is connected to a civil lawsuit that was filed on Friday, by the way. The county asked for the extension to count more than 3,000 ballots that were mailed late to voters. The Supreme Court said no, saying that the Cobb election workers can only count mail ballots received by 7 o'clock tonight.
Yeah. And you know what's even more interesting is that's Cobb County.
Right.
We've reported on the mail delays in the metro recently, and we've reported on U.S. Senator John Ossoff, who has seemingly led the charge to try and get things back up to speed. Not quite sure if that's been successful just yet, because things take time, right? But what's interesting about this is you've got Vice President Kamala Harris, who is originally from California, so she decided to do an absentee ballot. Obviously, she resides in D.C. But here's what she said, Gavir, and she said this out of her own mouth. She said, I am going to trust the system, meaning the system, the Postal Service that is responsible for getting her absentee ballot back to California. She said that's what she plans to do. Former President Donald Trump plans to vote in person today in Florida, and then he's going to be hosting a watch party there in Mar-a-Lago with J.D. Vance. Kamala Harris is going to be in D.C. with hers, where she will be at her alma mater, Howard University.
And that's important, too. She talked about that as well, about why she chose Howard.
Yeah.
She said that she was first elected to like a student body position while at Howard, and she said, wouldn't that be pretty cool to be back at Howard and be the first HBCU elected president, right? So I think it was, in a way, for her sentimental, maybe, to hold her watch party there.
And Gavir, I'm not running for president or anything like that, but I do want to let you guys know at the University of North Florida, I was a senator. I don't know if it really. I'm on my HOA board. I don't know if it translated to much in this life, but who knows? You never know. Right?
Down the road, we may be calling you Mr. Mayor.
You never know. You never know. But again, they're going to be voting today. Donald Trump and then Kamala Harris already voting by absentee. But I think, again, for the people in Cobb County who are probably a little more concerned, and I'm actually going to try to get this answer as we play another story about what people may be able to do if they're afraid their ballot won't get there on time. I don't want to give you any wrong information, so we'll come back to that in just a second. But do want to tell you about some of the free rides that you can get to the polls, something that Uber and Lyft is doing right now, Gavir. They are giving riders 50% off trips to their polling place.
They are. And electric scooter and bike company Lime is offering 2 free 30-minute rides. To get that perk, you got to use this code. Real easy. I bet you can guess it. Vote 2024 when you start your vehicle. Okay, so
and
that's pretty good. And Krispy Kreme.
Yes.
jumping in on it too. You get your little sticker that says "I voted." You go in, you get a free glazed donut.
Look, you get the glazed donut. IKEA's giving away free yogurt today.
Yes.
Johnny Rockets will give you a free milkshake
now, that
today.
sounds pretty good to me.
I mean, I want one of each. If I could just go in and just keep that I voted stick. The problem is my son took mine as soon as I got home from
Did
voting.
he go to the polls with you, by the way?
He
you
did
take
not
him?
go. He did not go to the
Okay.
polls. And you know what?
Children are allowed to go, by the way.
Yes, because there may be people who have younger children like, I don't have anybody to watch my child. Well, you
Right.
can bring them there. Mine is very busy. I didn't need him hitting the wrong buttons on my ballots and whatnot, so we did not bring him. But I will tell you this, something that's interesting, Gravir, when I went and I was walking inside, one of the poll workers, she said to me, I had my phone in my hand just because naturally I just carried it in my hand a lot. And she said, hey, so I'm going to ask if you would put your phone away. A lot of people assume that when they walk into these polling places that they can come on out and say, oh, I want to take a selfie with my
Right.
You cannot do that.
Right.
You cannot do that. And poll workers will ask you as you come in to keep your phone in a place where it is hidden, where you are not, looking at it or anything like that. But, Gravir, in that same respect, for people who say, well, I wanted to see what my sample ballot was or so I can save some time and just get it, you can't print your sample ballot. And you can bring that in. That is no problem there, but you can't have it digitally on your phone because, again, in the times that we're living in right now, they don't want any technology. We're talking about, unfortunate hackings that have happened.
I know.
We've even had 2 bomb threats today as well in Fulton County, Gravir.
More. We have 5.
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
actually,
yeah.
right before,
You're right, yeah.
Right before we came on, you and I spoke with our assignment desk, Gary Stillwell, on our assignment desk, and I said, hey, what's going on here? And I said, don't we have 3 bomb threats? He said, no, it's now up to 5. Now they weren't credible, and they did evacuate the polling locations, but they then were able to just get everybody back in to continue the voting process. So thankfully, it was nothing credible there. There were 2 threats apparently that we're learning of in Camilla, Georgia, and I wasn't really sure where in the world is Camilla, so I had to look that up. But it's 3.5 hours sort of southwest of Atlanta. Tiny little town, about 5,000 people, predominantly a black community, and the reports we're getting is 2 bomb threats, and those polling locations were actually closed temporarily as a result. So yeah, we are living in crazy times. I was thinking earlier today when we're talking about all the security, right?
National
The
Guard
National
being on
Guards-
standby.
I mean, we're not a third world country,
Right.
right? We're a democracy where people go to the polls, you cast your ballot, you're proud to do it because you're an American citizen and you can, you're voting for president and all these other very important races. This is crazy that you have to have the police out or the National Guard out on days like today.
The tension is so high right now, and I think that's where it's quite unfortunate. I believe anyone watching or anyone who's been following the election, regardless of which side you're on, people understand that there's a lot on the line right now. And yes, everybody probably wants to see whoever their candidate is win. But that's not necessarily how things go. So hopefully things will remain peaceful today. But again, we have seen several bomb threats that ended up being non-credible. But it did disrupt what was happening at 2 polling locations. And I'm reading this, the Etris Darnell Community Center and the C.H. Gullett Elementary School.
In Fulton?
Yeah, in Fulton. They were evacuated for about 30 minutes. They are up and running again. But because of that, they are now, I should say, the county is seeking a court order to extend the polling locations hours past the statewide 7 p.m. deadline. And that's to compensate for this disruption.
Well, that only makes sense, right?
Right. So we can't say that that has happened yet as far as the hours being extended, but when we find out, we will be sure to push it to your phone on the free Atlanta News First app. But again, of those 2 polling locations that were, 2 of which that were evacuated and that had to be evacuated for about 30 minutes, they are trying to compensate for that time that was lost in the event that it did impact any of the voters who were planning to go out there.
That's only fair, in my opinion. But I don't know what
We'll
that's
see what
worth.
happens, right? You are right about that. Okay, so Brendan Keefe, our chief investigator, has been putting together some really incredible pieces, and he's so creative in the way that he does it because he likes to do it in 60 seconds. Gravir, we don't always have the longest attention spans, so learning something in 60 seconds is good.
It's good.
So where do you vote? Because you have to go to your assigned precinct. He explains.
time, your questions asked and answered in 60 seconds. Where do I cast my ballot? Sounds like a simple question, but the answer may not be that easy. You may have voted in this same spot for the last several elections, but don't be surprised if the location has moved to the other side of your neighborhood, even if you've stayed put. Polling places can change from one primary to the next, or even from the primary to the general election. So how do I find out where to vote? It turns out the answer is easy, and it's already on your phone. Just Google the My Voter page, or you can point your web browser to mvp.sos.ga.gov. Then enter your first name, your last name, your date of birth, and then scroll to the polling information section. You can then get the precise location for this election. Counting down to the election, I'm Brendan Keefe. Atlanta News First investigates.
He is so stinking creative. And he edits all those himself.
Yeah, and you know what I always
He's really
do,
good.
Gavir? I'm usually watching that top right-hand corner to make sure he can say it in 60 seconds.
And he does.
He never fails me.
He never fails,
Never
right.
fails, for sure.
Gosh, do you know, okay, so we were talking about how truncated this campaign has been.
Mhm.
We looked, let's see, it was June 27th
Yep.
when President Biden and Mr. Trump had their debate here in Atlanta when
Yep.
things kind of went south for Mr. Biden.
Mhm.
And then on the 21st of July is when he said, I am stepping aside and endorsing Kamala Harris as the candidate for president. So it has been a very tight race. Both campaigns have been here a lot. Have they not?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think we've known really since the 2020 election how important the state of Georgia is, and then that is no different this time around go around either, because you have to think about it, Gavir. There are 7 swing states.
Yes.
We have Georgia, and I'm not going to name them all because I don't want to miss anybody, but there are 7 swing states, truly meaning that this election could go either way, and also meaning that they've got a lot of electoral college votes that these candidates are trying to win.
Correct.
We understand how important the electoral college is, and the popular vote as well.
Right.
And Gavir, you've been covering politics a little bit longer than I have. Back in 2000, when what happened with
George
with
W.
George Bush
and
Al Gore.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that ended up going to the Supreme Court. You had the hanging chads down in Florida because the difference in the popular vote was so slim. George Bush won the Electoral College. Al Gore won the popular vote by this much. Took it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court at that time was Republican, leaning Republican, conservative, I should say. Shouldn't say Republican, leaning conservative, and went for George Bush. There was a lot of controversy in that election. Then you had the campaign with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in 2016. Okay, so that went for Donald Trump. People don't understand sometimes that you can win the popular vote but not get enough delegates
Correct.
in the Electoral College. And some people may not know what the Electoral College is, but generally the larger states have more delegates to the convention.
Right.
California, Texas, New York, right? You see the candidates spending a lot of time in those states, and those delegates, if I'm remembering correctly, are equal to the number of representatives and senators that state has.
Correct.
So obviously a larger state's going to have more delegates, so you want to win those states. And that Electoral College is who actually then selects the President of the United States, right? So one person could win the popular vote but not get enough electoral votes.
And Gavir, here in Georgia, we have 16.
Yeah.
And I think what's always interesting about election night, too, is you expect to know more than what you will know by the time you go to bed. And the reason I say that is because we're in different time zones, meaning so at 7 o'clock, there's going to be 60 electoral votes. You've got Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, Vermont, and Virginia. Those 6 states will have their Electoral College votes in at 7 p.m.
Right.
Then at 7:30, you have North Carolina, which has 16 Electoral College votes, Ohio with 17, and West Virginia with 4. And this list goes on. You've got 8 p.m., 8:30, 9 o'clock, 10, 11, 12 in the morning for Hawaii, Alaska at 1 in the morning. So when we talk about, the candidates reaching the 270, which is needed for them to win the majority, it could take a while before we actually see that.
Yeah, definitely. And their campaigns are so different.
Correct.
I think that's been very clear. Kamala Harris is bringing in the star power.
Yes.
I mean, she has brought in Hollywood. She has brought in, Usher, and you name them.
I don't know. There probably hasn't been one person that she hasn't had on this stage.
Correct. I think Mr. Trump has just, he's been with Joe Rogan, and he just. Actually, Kamala Harris was on Saturday Night Live.
Right, which was very different. That's not something you would see or maybe even expect.
Right.
But like you said, that goes to show you how different these campaigns have been. And our very own Maria Moreau, she actually got a chance to speak with Kennesaw State University political science professor Ben Taylor about the campaign performance. Here's what they had to say.
The 47th president of the United States, either Republican Donald Trump or Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris, will be inaugurated into the Oval Office in January 2025, and Georgia will be one of those very small handful of states that will decide the outcome of this year's presidential election. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Political Update. Here on Atlanta News First, I'm Tim Darnell, joined by one of our favorite people to talk politics with here at Atlanta News First, Dr. Benjamin Taylor, professor of political science at Kennesaw State University. Dr. Taylor, Georgia has shattered virtually every previous early and advanced voting record. You and I were talking before we began recording. You have some fascinating insights on the demographics that are really powering all of these record-shattering numbers behind early and advanced voting. Take us through a couple of these fascinating insights that we were talking about just a few minutes ago.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Tim. I really enjoy being here. But one of the things we've noticed is that the age demographic breakdown. So when we think about voting overall, usually voters between the ages of 18 and 29 are some of the least likely voters to vote. But what's fascinating is that age demographic is actually outpacing the 30 to 39-year-old demographic, which is something we wouldn't expect. So that demonstrates a bit that there is some real momentum, I think, among young voters to turn out to vote. Again, they aren't turning out at the same levels as the people we would most expect, which are basically middle-aged voters, people between the ages of 50 and 65. But in any event, young voters are really turning out at a very high clip, particularly the youngest demographic. And then also women continue to outpace men in voter turnout in Georgia based on Secretary of State data. But when it comes to racial and ethnic demographics, it looks pretty much like the state. African Americans are turning out at about a 25% clip. They're about 25% of the voting public, and white voters are about 59%, give or take, which is basically representative of the state overall. So in general, turnout is robust. And it's going to be very exciting to see how many people turn out on Election Day to see if we can get the largest turnout in Georgia history.
When we were talking about the turnout earlier before we began recording, and you find it fascinating that the 18 to 29 group and also perhaps even the 30 to 39 age groups are turning out more robustly than they have in the past in terms of early voting.
Right.
Does this lean more toward the Democrats' favor and Kamala Harris? Or, Donald Trump appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast very recently, the most listened to podcaster in the world, and that's a podcast that's aimed at that 18 to 29 graphic or demographic. Who does this actually benefit?
That's a great question, and I think that both campaigns have arguments that the turnout among 18 to 29-year-olds is working in their favor. As you point out, the Trump campaign has made a concerted effort, much more so than previous Republican presidential campaigns, to target the youngest, most unlikely voting demographic, which are these young voters. And they think that they can do that because they think they're breaking up some of the traditional ethnic boundaries in terms of how African Americans largely vote for Democrats, but think that they can make inroads with young African American voters, particularly African American men. But the Harris campaign, if you look at poll data, which until Election Day, all we have is poll data to sort of estimate what the voting public might look like. polling data suggests that Vice President Harris is the overwhelming favorite of voters in this age group. So if polling data is accurate, and if the Harris campaign is able to get the vote choice in Georgia to reflect basic sort of approval ratings in most public opinion polls, then having high turnout among this demographic is probably good news for them. On the other hand, if you're the Trump campaign and you think you're making inroads, particularly with minority men in this young age demographic who basically would not have voted in the past, but if you've gotten them to come out to vote, and they're going to vote for the Republican candidate, that's a very important change in American elections. So these are empirical questions that we can't answer until Election Day, but that's sort of what both campaigns would think about looking at this robust young demographic turnout.
From the standpoint of an electoral strategy, is it a gamble? Is it a gambit that the Trump campaign is playing, really hoping and praying that this one demographic that has historically been low propensity in terms of turnout at the polls, isn't a gamble on his part that he is making such a hard sell to that 18 to 29 demographic?
Well, it might be, but it's going to be a very, very close election. If we remember 2020, fewer than 12,000 votes separated President Biden from at the time President Trump. So, similarly this year, it's going to be very, very close. So if you're looking to scrape by a few thousand votes here or there, doing these sort of high risk, high reward strategies like targeting young minority voters for the Trump campaign who historical patterns would suggest would not vote for a Republican candidate if they come out to vote, but the Trump campaign thinks they have a message that attracts them. Similarly, the Harris campaign is interestingly turning their strategy from historical norms of a Democratic candidate, whereas Democratic candidates would not have spent a lot of time trying to motivate voters in suburbs and college-educated voters who historically have been Republicans. Now you see the Harris campaign targeting that demographic specifically, particularly suburban women who historically have been Republicans. These people may have actually even voted for Brian Kemp in 2018 and 2022, but now the Harris campaign is targeting those voters. So you see sort of a real evolution of campaign strategy in Georgia as the demographics change and as Georgia voting patterns evolve over time as well.
Now, very recently, Vice President Harris held an Atlanta rally in DeKalb County where former President Barack Obama, arguably the most popular figure in the Democratic Party, and among many, many voters, he still has a number of supporters who have, endorsed his candidacy years ago and two very successful terms as president. She has really encouraged him and is incorporating his comments to really raise her profile among the younger African American male voters. Why do you think, and does she even have a gap in that demographic support? And if so, does using Barack Obama help her close that gap?
Potentially, using former President Obama as a spokesperson is always a good idea. Anytime you get a former president of your party to come out and endorse you, one, we would expect such a thing. But secondly, it's very important because it gets a lot of media attention. And one of the things about these rallies that's important to realize is that the rally itself is there to generate media attention so that these what we call low propensity voters who don't really engage much in politics or think much about it. They're going to see it on the news. They're going to see it in their social media feed, and that'll sort of give them a cue. Oh, yeah, something important is going on. But moreover, President Obama is extremely popular with the Democratic base, and these rallies in Georgia and other swing states are designed to sort of get local media attention, but also be, fundamentally pep rallies for the base. And so the base activists go to these rallies, they get to see a former president, they get to see stars like Bruce Springsteen or whomever, and then they get really energized, and then they go home and they tell their friends and their family who may be some of these low propensity voters, and that's sort of the cascading social network effect of these rallies, and that's really what you see going on. Whether or not it will help her specifically with any one demographic or not is really an empirical question that we have to wait for Election Day to know, but I do think that that's kind of the idea that the Harris campaign is running with, and the Trump campaign as well, with some of their speakers, as you pointed out, going on podcasts like Joe Rogan, getting the mere fact that there's a presidential campaign, hard though it is to believe that there are people who don't know what's happening. That's true. There are people who are sort of not plugged into politics, and going to these sort of using big name folks in rallies, but also going to these sort of unlikely places like podcasts are really good ways to get the information to these low information voters that the campaigns need them to have to at least motivate them to come out to vote. And then, of course, vote for their candidacy, whomever they are.
And speaking of going to places that are a little out of the way, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance held a rally at a small church in Zebulon, Georgia, in Pike County. What was the rationale for holding an event at a church in a small community, kind of halfway between here and Macon, sort of to the southwest, and then heading north to the Gas South Arena for a very sold-out Duluth rally? What was the rationale behind that?
Well, the idea there, I think, is that the Trump campaign knows that they need to generate big turnout amongst what we would think of as Republican-based voters. So that's why you go to Zebulon, which is not really an area that would be very competitive in the presidential race. And it's a very strongly conservative area. And so, but you want to generate a lot of turnout there. You want to get the margins in the strongholds as large as you possibly can, so that when the vote count comes in from the Metro Atlanta area, Metro Columbus, Metro Augusta, Macon, Savannah, that you have a cushion, as it were, so that the larger, more populated counties, which are much more heavily Democratic, when they start turning it, if you've got big margins in rural areas and more conservative strongholds, then you can sort of hold on to the lead, as it were, on election night. But so that's one of the reasons you go to Zebulon if you're former President Trump. But then you saw him go to Gas South Arena because, again, the North Atlanta suburbs for decades and decades were very, very, very comfortable places for Republicans, and that has been less the case in recent years, particularly in national and federal level elections. And so I think you see the Trump campaign trying to blunt some of the Harris sort of margins there, right? They're trying to remind these voters, oh, yes, you are Republicans, and we have a message that you might want to hear, and so that's why they go there. But again, the rallies are for the activists. They get excited and motivated, and then they go out and tell their friends and family about it and do some activism themselves and maybe volunteer for the campaign. And that's sort of the dual strategies that the Trump campaign is running in and around Georgia.
One of the other battleground states besides Georgia, Georgia will be crucial to election night, November 5th, the results, whatever they may be. What are the other battleground states that you are watching?
Well, the big battlegrounds in the 2024 election are Arizona, Nevada. Then we have the so-called blue wall states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And then you've got sort of the new South, as it were, of Georgia and North Carolina. Those are the big swing states in this election, although there's always the chance that a state that we weren't expecting could pop up and be important. I know that recent poll data from the New York Times shows that Kamala Harris has a fairly sizable lead in the Nebraska 2nd District, and so she might win that Electoral College vote. And then, of course, there's a tight Senate race out there as well. Is it enough to shift the state of Nebraska into competitive territory? Probably not, but it's something to keep an eye on. There's always stuff like that out there. But those aforementioned states are the ones to keep an eye on, and, the results are going to come in as the time zones change. And so Georgia and North Carolina are probably going to be a couple of the first states to release results, although North Carolina does close voting a little later than Georgia does. But in any event, those are the states I'm watching.
In terms of time zones, as we wrap up, will we see a projected winner to become the 47th president of the United States before midnight, Tuesday, November 5th?
That seems unlikely, but possible, but I would say unlikely, just because of the vagaries of the way states count ballots. Pennsylvania and Wisconsin specifically have varying rules about how you count ballots and when you can start counting ballots. And so really it's an administrative problem is what it is. There's nothing nefarious happening, but it's just that states have different rules about when and how you can count ballots, what types of ballots can be counted, and the effect of that is that it just slows the process down. Although I will say that Secretary of State Raffensperger, for Georgia's part, has said numerous times that Georgia will be counted, tabulated, and we will know who won Georgia. He hopes I've heard him say midnight. So, relatively speaking, that would be great. Personally, I'd be really excited about that.
As would a lot of people in the newsroom, I know. Thanks to Dr. Ben Taylor, Professor of Political Science at Kennesaw State University, for joining us on this edition of Political Update. We have our podcast airing every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. on YouTube. You can watch all of our podcasts on the Atlanta News First YouTube channel and listen to all of the Atlanta News First podcast wherever you download your podcast, whether or not it be on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting platform. Thanks for watching and listening to this edition of Political Update on Atlanta News First as Georgia continues its role as the premier battleground state in election 2024.
Man, can I just say, this is one of those nights that I wish that I didn't have to go to bed so early.
I know.
I have to
same.
be up tomorrow morning because I really would
Listen,
love to stay up and watch those votes come in.
Gavir, you know we'll probably still be up later
We
than we're
will.
supposed to be because we can't help ourselves, and that's just part of being a journalist. You want to
Yep.
see how things are going to go. That was interesting hearing Ben Taylor talk about that there, and I wish you guys could have seen our faces behind the scenes. We were wondering, what's he going to say that we could expect to hear of a winner around midnight tonight? And he said that's unlikely. Because of just how things are and where these votes are coming from and whatnot. And we told you guys earlier, so if you are just joining us, we told you a little earlier about Cobb County not getting an extension to count those mail-in ballots. This is a story that we have been watching closely because despite delays at the U.S. Post Office, Georgia's Supreme Court made a final ruling yesterday afternoon, and this is all connected to a civil lawsuit that was filed on Friday. So the county asked for an extension to count more than 3,000 ballots that are mailed late to voters. So that's, again, 3,000 ballots that were mailed late to voters.
So they didn't get them in on time.
They didn't get exactly. As in, the people who were waiting on them, they were trying to figure out where their ballots were, and they hadn't received them. So the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, I should say, said no, saying that Cobb election workers can only count mail ballots that are received by 7 o'clock tonight. Now, it is important to note that in the event you didn't receive your absentee ballot, you can still vote at your assigned precinct. And I want to say that again, that in the event that you didn't receive your absentee ballot, you can still vote today at your assigned precinct. We have the information of how you can find your assigned precinct available for you on AtlantaNewsFirst.com, because if you go to a random place in your county, they will turn you away. They can't let you come in.
Like for early voting?
Correct.
There are like a number of different locations where you can go in your county. You don't have to go to your specific precinct, but in this case today, if you are planning on voting, you definitely need to go to your assigned precinct. And there's some rules that you got to follow too, right?
Exactly, because I think oftentimes people assume, you just come in, you're just voting for who you want to vote for, and then you go home. And while that is true, there are a couple of things that you can and you just cannot do, like what you wear.
Right. Right.
If you're in support of a particular candidate, you are not allowed to wear any shirts or hats or any clothing that can be seen because poll workers will have to turn your way. That's just Georgia law that doesn't allow you to campaign.
And our chief investigator, Brendan Keefe, actually in 60 seconds takes a look at what you need to know.
Let's start the clock. First off, can you take a picture of your ballot? Sorry, all you TikTokers and Instagrammers, your phone will have to stay inside your pocket, inside the polling place. No selfies or live streams, even for influencers. Georgia's ballots are secret on purpose because a century ago, people were caught paying others to vote a certain way. A photo would provide proof they've held up their end of the bargain. So you can't take a picture of yourself, anyone else, or your ballot. If I'm in line when the polls close, do I still get to vote? Yes. They will keep the polls open until the last person in line at 7 p.m. gets to the front to cast their ballot. Can I wear a political t-shirt or a campaign pin inside the polling place? Anything for or against a certain candidate on the ballot is banned within 150 feet of a polling place and 25 feet from a voter in line. We're counting down to the election. I'm Brendan Keefe. Atlanta News First investigates.
And they'll get their measuring tapes out.
I know, you were saying you saw that earlier, which is crazy. I didn't even know that
Yes.
was a thing, but I guess they've got to be accurate because some people will likely challenge the
Reminded
rules.
me of the football game and, like the fourth down or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
The referees out there with the...
You know how it goes.
I do.
Just really quickly, I do want to tell you that the My Voter page is such a great resource, and you can access that by going over to AtlantaNewsFirst.com or to the free Atlanta News First app. Here, you'll be able to put in your first initial, your last name, the county, and your date of birth. And when you click Submit, I almost filled it out myself, but I want y'all to see all my information, so I'm not going to do that. But when you fill out these 4 spots here and you click submit, it is really going to give you everything that you need to know, because it'll let you know your voter registration status. Hopefully, you've known about that, because if you are not registered to vote, there is nothing you can do today.
Right.
You missed that deadline a while ago. It'll tell you also about the locations, your polling location. You've got your registration information that is on file with your county office, your sample ballot. And those are all very important things, so that when you do get inside of your polling location and your assigned precinct, because again, this isn't early voting, this is voting on the actual day, you'll be able to maybe spare yourself a couple of minutes. You know what you're voting for, you know how you're going to vote, and you'll just be able to handle that business without any delays.
Right. And boy, I tell you, Brooks, in these last, I don't know about you, I'm sure you at home, you, Brooks, have been getting, your phone's been blowing up with texts from the campaigns, political calls coming in, the ads everywhere. And these campaigns have been hitting it hard in these last few days of this election. Both of them just crisscrossing the country, from California, Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, which is a crucial swing state, and then, of course, here in Georgia.
And think about this, Gravir, how many times we reported on the air that Kamala Harris was coming, Donald Trump was coming, J.D. Vance was coming, Tim Walz was coming, Gwen Walz was coming, President Obama was coming. You know, any of those. We have seen a lot of people on the Republican ticket and on the Democratic ticket that have continued to come to Georgia, especially within this last month. And I mean, up to the minute where both candidates were here over the weekend. I mean, it really just goes to show you.
It exhausts me just thinking
about it. I don't know how they have the energy to do it, but I guess when you want to be in the White House, you do what you have to do, right? And here's why. We talk about the Electoral College votes and how important a state like Georgia is. We've got 16 votes that could go whichever way. Historically, Georgia has been red. And a Republican. In 2020, we saw things switch a bit. And I think that's why right now there's so much up in the air where people just say they have no idea how this is going to go. Because, again, you might have thought it was going to go one way in 2020 when we had President Biden along with Trump, and that didn't go the way that some people assumed it would go, just because of what we've seen historically in Georgia. So I think many people are on the edge of their seats and just curious to see, will Georgia remain blue? Will it turn back red? How is it going to look? That's yet to be determined.
Really, at the end of the day, I think people vote what is important to them.
Absolutely.
Right? So, for example, Georgia's abortion law is important to a lot of people. Kamala Harris is really focused in on that. Immigration, okay? So that's a hot button topic. Mr. Trump has been focusing on that, as well as the economy. I mean, bottom line, what's the line? Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?
Right. And you may even remember, Gravir, just about immigration, how the spotlight really was on our state after the death of Laken Riley, who was a student that was killed on the campus of the University of Georgia while she was out for a jog. She was not a student at UGA, but she just happened to be there on the campus, out there running. And then she was killed allegedly by Jose Ibarra, who was accused in her murder. And that put a big spotlight on our state regarding immigration, and
because he was in this country illegally.
Correct. So there have been a lot of people, and it's no secret. I mean, there are many sources that have reported people's thoughts about Kamala Harris and how she's handled the border, and we know that some people probably took that into account as they voted. Likewise, on the other side, there might have been some of the things that maybe some voters felt they weren't as confident in former President Trump about what he did when he was in office, and then And I do want to say this, and I'm trying to make sure I'm very careful with my words, but I do want to say this because I think it's so important for people just to understand, politics as a whole. And I mean this on both sides. Making sure you're doing your research. Sometimes you can look at particular news outlets and get something that will reiterate what you feel. Sometimes, you look at different things. Locally, we are sure to. We don't have analysts. We don't have talking heads on on our airwaves. We truly are bringing the facts and telling people what
letting
they
you
need
decide.
to, and letting you decide. I always say that as a journalist, you give people something to think about, but you don't tell them how to think. And I think something like that is so important, especially these past 4 years, and just in general right now anyway.
Right. Do we want to go to Doug Reardon's story? Doug Reardon actually did a story about this election and the last-minute campaigning by both of these campaigns and what they've been focusing on.
Yesterday we voted in Gwinnett County, and today we are voting in Fulton County.
In this video posted to Twitter this week, a man claims to be a Haitian immigrant who voted for Kamala Harris in both Gwinnett and in Fulton counties. Then he flashes 4 identical fake IDs to the camera. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and his COO, Gabriel Sterling, tweeted out the video was, quote, a ridiculously obvious lie and, quote, likely a production of Russian troll farms. They were right, said the FBI in a statement, calling the men Russian-influenced actors and saying the video was, quote, part of Moscow's broader effort to raise unfounded questions about the integrity of the U.S. election. Sterling had already warned Georgians about this kind of activity this week, urging people to be cautious and to trust officials.
And it is a choice. People are making a choice not to believe those of us who are in the government offices, and I get it sometimes. You should be skeptical. You can ask questions, and those can be legitimate. But some of these things are so cuckoo-ca-choo crazy town that it's ridiculous to even try to respond to sometimes.
A real voter issue took over Cobb County Superior Court on Friday. The ACLU sued the county for failing to mail out 3,000 absentee ballots. They demanded the county overnight the ballots to voters and extend the deadline for return to November 8th, the last day for voters to fix mistakes with their ballots. Doug Reardon, Atlanta News First.
So, just some information that you need to know about the last-minute campaigning and that specific focus here in Georgia.
I mean, I'm telling you, they hit the ground running, and that has been, like you said, it's been exhausting just to watch it.
Right.
But really, this is the calm before the storm, and I don't mean a storm as in something is going to happen, but just things really will start to pick up as those numbers begin to come in. We've made this so easy for you to stay up to date on what is happening here locally and beyond across our country. If you text the word election to 470-777 WANF, we've made it so easy for you to get all the resources that you need. Gravir, we've been talking all morning long about the different things and the resources that are available for people who still have to get out and vote.
Right.
So if you text election to 470-777 WANF, you will get a text message to your phone, and we've made it all so easy for you.
And it may be a little bit of a rush right now at lunchtime. It's usually busy in the morning, busy around lunchtime when people get a lunch break, and then in the evening when folks are getting off work. The polls do close at 7 o'clock tonight. If you are in line at 7, you will get to cast your ballot.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, and we will have more continuing coverage after Atlanta News First at noon here on Atlanta News First Plus at 12:30. Make it a great one.